Welcome to the deep dive.
The place where we try to take these huge, sometimes intimidating topics.
Right, these vast oceans of information.
Exactly, and we distill them down to the essential, fascinating insights that you can really grab onto.
And today, we are really starting at the beginning. We're doing a deep dive into the absolute foundational framework of human thought.
We are. This is part one of cognitive psychology. We're talking history, methods, and the biological hardware, the brain itself.
It really is the essential groundwork.
It is. I mean, when we're talking about cognition, that's how you acquire, store, transform, use, and communicate basically every piece of information you ever encounter.
So
Everything. Perception, attention, memory, reasoning, decision-making.
Yeah.
It's the operating system of your life. And, because it all happens so automatically, we don't appreciate the complexity. It's just staggering.
Okay, so let's try to make that complexity a bit more tangible. Let's use a couple of scenarios to unpack it.
Good idea.
First, picture this. The dark alley scenario. You're walking alone at night, maybe a little on edge,
Senses are heightened.
and suddenly you see it, a vague movement down a dark side street, and your whole body just freezes.
And in that split second, your cognitive system it's running at warp speed. First, you need attention, right? To focus your limited resources on that one mysterious thing, not the car horn down the street.
Then what happens?
Then comes perception. You're interpreting the raw sensory data. Is that shape tall? Is it moving fast or slow? And that feeds right into pattern recognition.
Trying to classify it.
Exactly. Is it a cat?
Huh.
A plastic bag blowing in the wind? Or is it something else? And all of this entire chain is calling on your memory.
Your entire library of past experiences, dangers you've learned about, categories you know.
Then it all happens, in less than a second? You go from a blurry shape to a full-blown fear response. It's astounding.
Okay, now let's contrast that with another scenario, the crowded mall.
A different kind of stress.
Totally. You're just walking through, maybe thinking about your shopping list, and someone bumps into you and says, "Oh, it's you. How's you been?"
And your mind just screams, "Who are you?"
Yes. So the cognitive gears shift completely. You have immediate recognition, right? The face is familiar.
But then comes the hard part. The recall. That frantic, almost painful, mental search for context.
Who is this person? A former coworker, a neighbor from 3 houses ago.
And you're using reasoning and problem-solving strategies to try and figure it out. Like, okay, I saw her near the bookstore. Does that help? She mentioned college. Which one was I at then?
You're digging through your knowledge representation.
Which is just this massive, messy, complex mental organization of everything you know, hoping for a match. And then you have to use language to respond and make a decision about how to handle it.
Do I pretend I know her and risk looking foolish, or do I just admit I've forgotten?
It's a social nightmare, but it's a perfect illustration that cognition isn't one clean thing. It's a messy, high-stakes, interactive loop.
Which I imagine leads to the big challenge for researchers. How do you study something so complex and fast with any kind of scientific rigor?
That's the million-dollar question. If you want real, solid conclusions, you often have to isolate one little piece of that puzzle. You have to strip it down to a bare-bones version you can actually measure in a lab.
But then you have a problem. If I study your memory by asking you to memorize, say, a list of 10 random words in a quiet room, how do I know that what I find actually applies to you trying to remember a name in a loud, crowded mall?
And that is the absolute core tension in cognitive science. It's the challenge of ecological validity.
Ecological validity.
Yeah. We have to be sure that our findings from these controlled, simplified lab experiments actually apply to the real world. Critics are always, and rightly, pointing out that if a task is too artificial, we might be studying something that only sort of relates to real life.
So our mission today, then, is to build that fundamental framework. We're going to define the field, trace its historical roots to see how we even got here.
We'll look at the specific research methods scientists use to navigate that trade-off between control and validity.
And finally, we'll examine the biological hardware, the brain, where all this incredible processing actually happens.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let's start with the history. Where do these ideas even come from?
Well, to really get a handle on the cognitive revolution, you have to go way back, centuries back, really, to a philosophical debate that set the whole stage.
And that's the tension between empiricism and nativism.
Exactly. The empiricists, you're thinking of people like John Locke, David Hume, they championed the idea that knowledge comes almost entirely from our individual experiences, from sensory input.
This is the famous tabula rasa idea, right? The mind as a blank slate at birth.
That's Locke. It's a position that really emphasizes how malleable we are. We are who we are because of what we've learned. And the main way we learn, they argued, was through mental association.
So two things happen at the same time, and your mind links them together.
Precisely. If you hear a bell every time you taste a certain food, your mind connects bell and that taste. The environment, for an empiricist, is the ultimate shaper of who you become.
Okay, so that's one camp. What's the other?
The other camp is nativism. This is where you have thinkers like René Descartes and Immanuel Kant, and they argue that no, some cognitive functions are constitutional. They're part of our native ability. They aren't learned.
They're just built in.
They're hardwired. The nativists would say, sure, you learn what to remember, but your basic capacity, like how many things you can hold in your short-term memory at once, that's an innate structure of the mind. It's there at birth.
So it sets the boundaries on what experience can even do?
It does. And this whole nature versus nurture debate is still with us, but
Yeah.
it wasn't until the late 1800s that anyone tried to bring these questions into a laboratory.
And that's the birth of experimental psychology.
Starting with structuralism, founded by Wilhelm Wundt in Germany, 1879. Wundt had this grand vision of creating a true science of mind.
And he wanted to do it by borrowing from chemistry and physics, right? Like find the basic elements.
Yes, it was an incredible ambition. He wanted to create a kind of periodic table for the mind. If you could just break consciousness down into its simplest, rawest components, you could figure out the laws of how they combine to form complex thoughts.
So how did he propose to do that?
The method was called introspection, and it involved these highly trained observers who would report on their conscious experience when they were shown a stimulus.
So I show you a red card and you tell me what you're thinking.
Not even what you're thinking. That's too high level. Wundt wanted you to describe the experience based on exactly 4 properties. The mode, is it visual, auditory? The quality, is it blue, is it sweet? Its intensity and its duration.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And subjective.
It was. And that was its fatal flaw. They weren't describing thought. They were trying to describe sensory elements below the level of meaning.
And if 2 of your highly trained observers disagreed,
You had no way to solve it. If one person reported seeing a pure red and another reported a red with a hint of orange, who's right? There's no objective measure. It just led to these unresolvable arguments. And the whole school basically collapsed under its own weight.
so as structuralism is sort of fading out, what comes next?
In the U.S., you get functionalism, and its biggest champion is William James. And James just wasn't interested in the structure of the mind at all.
He wanted to know its purpose.
The why. Why does the mind work the way it does? This was heavily influenced by Darwin, you see. Mental operations must serve a function. They have to help us adapt to our environment.
This sounds much more practical.
Oh, completely.
Mhm.
James was a master at connecting these ideas to real life. His discussion on habit is a perfect example. He called habit the flywheel of society.
The flywheel of society, I like that.
He argued that every little action you take, good or bad, leaves a trace. He has this amazing quote, something like, down among his nerve cells and fibers, the molecules are counting it, registering and storing it up to be used against him when the next temptation comes.
Wow, that's basically a prediction of neuroplasticity, decades before anyone could prove it.
It's stunning. So the functionalists wanted to study whole, active people doing real things, not just analyzing sensory fragments in a dark room.
But then the pendulum swings again. Hard.
Violently. Away from the mind entirely. This is behaviorism, which just dominated psychology from, say, the 1930s to the 1960s. Their whole thing was the only way to be a real science is to get rid of the mind completely.
So no thinking, no consciousness, no expecting.
None of it. If it's an unobservable mental state, banish it. The only thing psychology should study is observable stimuli and responses.
Wow.
SR psychology. That's it.
And John B. Watson took this to the absolute extreme.
He really did. He proposed that things like thoughts and images weren't mental at all. He famously suggested that thinking was nothing more than perceiving tiny muscle movements in your tongue and larynx.
So there's no internal representation. It's just subtle body movements.
According to Watson, yes. Now, B.F. Skinner, who was probably the most famous behaviorist, was a little more nuanced. He'd admit that, okay, sure, mental events probably exist, but he was adamant that we shouldn't use them in a scientific explanation. He especially hated the idea of mental representations, like an internal copy of something in the world. He just saw it as unscientific.
Why hypothesize some invisible thing in the head when you can just measure the observable input and the observable output?
That was his entire argument. Just do a functional analysis of the stimulus and the behavior that follows.
But that refusal to look inside the black box was ultimately what did them in, wasn't it?
It was. And the work of a researcher named Edward Tolman was a huge crack in the wall.
The rat mazes.
The classic rat mazes. Tolman showed that rats in a maze developed an internal mental representation of the maze, what he called a cognitive map, even if they weren't being rewarded for it.
How did he show that?
Well, he'd let one group of rats just wander the maze with no food at the end. They didn't seem to be learning anything. But then, when he suddenly introduced a reward, those rats learned to find it incredibly quickly, way faster than rats who were being rewarded from day one.
So they must have been building that map in their heads all along, just waiting for a reason to use it.
Exactly. It was undeniable proof that you had to account for internal things like goals, expectations, and representations to explain behavior, even in rats.
Now, while behaviorism is taking over America, something very different is happening in Europe.
Yes, Gestalt psychology. Wertheimer, Kafka, Kohler. And they just hated this reductionist, break everything into parts approach.
Their whole idea was about the whole, right? The
Gestalt. Yes, Gestalt is German for shape or configuration. Their famous saying was that the whole is different from and more than the sum of its parts.
And the best way to see this is with perception.
It really is. Think about 8 identical little line segments. If I just scatter them on a page, you see 8 lines. But if I arrange them into an octagon,
You don't see 8 lines anymore, you see an octagon.
your mind imposes that structure. The sensory input is the same, 8 lines, but the perceived experience is completely different. The mind is an active organizer, not a passive receiver.
Okay, so that's the major schools. What about the other influences?
Well, 2 other strands are really important, and they focus on variability. First is Jean Piaget and what he called genetic epistemology.
Which is really about developmental psychology.
It is. Piaget studied how the intellectual structures we use to understand the world change qualitatively as we grow up. He believed a child's cognitive framework is just fundamentally different at different ages.
The classic example is the one with the buttons, right?
Yes. You show a 4-year-old a row of 10 buttons. They count them. 10. Then right in front of them, you spread the buttons out so the row is longer.
And they'll say there are more buttons now.
They will. Because at that pre-operational stage, their mental structure confuses the physical property of length with the abstract concept of numerosity. Their cognition is literally constrained by their developmental stage.
And the second strand, focusing on variability.
Comes from Sir Francis Galton, and it's the study of individual differences. Galton was really driven by Darwinian ideas to measure the variations in human abilities.
And he developed some pretty rigorous tools to do it.
He did. Questionnaires, statistical tests. My favorite study of his is on mental imagery. He asked people to recall their breakfast table and to describe how vivid the image was in their mind's eye.
And what did he find?
He was shocked by the variability. Some people reported having no mental image at all, a complete absence of a mind's eye. Nothing. While others reported images so vivid they were almost like seeing it for real. And his huge contribution wasn't just finding that, but in developing the statistical methods to measure these things rigorously. That's fundamental to all psychology today.
So all of these streams, the failures of introspection and behaviorism, the ideas from Gestalt and Piaget, they're all setting the stage for a massive shift.
They are. The cognitive revolution. This happens after World War II, when it just becomes undeniable that you cannot explain complex human behavior without talking about mental representations.
And the war itself was actually a huge catalyst for this.
A huge and very harsh catalyst, mostly through a field called human factors engineering. Suddenly, you had this urgent need to design incredibly complex machines.
Like airplane cockpits, radar screens.
And you needed them to fit the cognitive and physical limits of the human beings operating them.
Because if you didn't, people died. The landing gear anecdote is a perfect, if terrifying, example.
It is. In some early planes, the lever to retract the landing gear and the lever for the brakes were too close together and felt too similar. So under stress, a pilot would sometimes grab the wrong one.
And to retract the landing gear instead of braking on the runway.
The lesson was profound. You can't just blame the human. You have to redesign the machine to fit the human's limitations. It was the birth of the person-machine system concept.
And this focus on human limits connects directly to another major influence, right? Communications engineering.
Yes. If a radio channel has a limited bandwidth, then maybe the human mind is also a limited capacity processor of information.
Which was quantified in that iconic paper by George Miller in 1956.
The magical number 7 plus or minus 2. A cornerstone paper. Miller showed that across a whole range of tasks, the number of unrelated things we can hold in our immediate awareness or memory is consistently between 5 and 9.
A measurable constraint on our mental hardware.
Exactly. But the real death blow to behaviorism intellectually came from linguistics, and specifically from Noam Chomsky.
This is where the idea of an internal representation becomes just unavoidable.
Completely. Chomsky showed that the behaviorist model of learning language, through reinforcement and punishment, was just totally inadequate.
Why?
Because language is generative. We can all produce and understand a basically infinite number of sentences we've never ever heard before. Behaviorism could only explain learned responses. It had no explanation for creativity.
And you see this so clearly in how kids learn to talk.
Oh, absolutely. Parents don't really correct grammar, they correct content. There's that famous dialogue where a child says, "Nobody don't like me."
And the mother tries to correct the grammar. No, say, "Nobody likes me."
And the child says, "Oh, nobody don't likes me." They're not just mimicking, they're applying an internal rule, even if it's the wrong one. Their internal system isn't ready for that correction.
So Chomsky proposed we must have some kind of internal system of rules.
An innate, mentally represented system he called a generative grammar. It's abstract, it's invisible, but it's absolutely necessary to explain how we use language. And that idea just shattered the behaviorist worldview.
And at the same time, you've got neuroscience and computers adding fuel to the fire.
Right. Hubble and Wiesel find specialized cells in the visual cortex that only respond to things like lines at a certain angle. That proves the brain isn't just a general-purpose lump. There's specialization.
And then the computer comes along.
And provides the perfect analogy, the computer metaphor. The mind is the software, the brain is the hardware. This sparks the whole field of artificial intelligence, trying to program computers to think like humans. And the central idea for all of them was that cognition had to be about representation, symbols, rules, images in the head.
Okay, so that's how we got here. We've thrown off behaviorism. We've accepted the mind. Now, how do we actually study it? Let's get into the methods.
Right, the modern toolbox.
Yeah.
And it's all about balancing that trade-off we mentioned earlier between control and ecological validity.
And you can start on one extreme with the highest ecological validity.
Which would be naturalistic observation. You're just observing people doing their cognitive work in the real world. Watching someone try to use a map in a new city or figure out a confusing ticket machine.
The big advantage is that it's real. This is how people actually behave.
But the disadvantage is you have almost no experimental control. You can see that someone is struggling with the map, but you can't isolate why. Is it the map's design? The bad lighting? Are they just anxious about being lost? You can't prove cause and effect.
So to get more control, you move to controlled observation.
Exactly. You start to standardize the environment. So instead of watching random people at any old ATM, you might set up a situation where different groups see different standardized instructions on a screen. You're channeling their behavior a bit.
And Piaget's clinical interview fits in here too, right?
Perfectly. It's a type of controlled observation. You're asking questions, but they're flexible, open-ended. If a child gives you a surprising answer, you can follow that train of thought. You get a much richer picture of their underlying logic than if you just have them check a box.
But for proving causality, you really need to go all the way to a true experiment.
That's the gold standard for control. A true experiment is where the researcher manipulates an independent variable, the thing you think is the cause, and measures the effect on a dependent variable. And the key ingredient is random assignment.
So if I randomly assign half of you to drink coffee and the other half to drink decaf, I can be pretty confident that any difference in your memory scores afterward was caused by the caffeine?
Exactly, because random assignment should, on average, balance out all the other differences between the groups.
And we can do that as a between subjects design.
Different people in each group, like your coffee example.
Or within subjects design.
Where the same people experience all the conditions. Yeah. So you'd have your memory tested once with coffee and another time with decaf.
There's also a really important distinction called a quasi-experiment.
Yes. This is when you can't do random assignment because the groups are based on pre-existing factors, things like age or gender or whether someone has a specific type of brain injury.
So we can compare memory in younger and older adults, but we can't claim age caused the difference, only that it's associated with it.
Precisely. Because we couldn't randomly assign people to be young or old.
Okay, so this whole toolbox is then used to investigate What are the big frameworks guiding research today?
There are four major modern paradigms. The first and the oldest from the revolution is the information processing approach.
This is the classic computer metaphor.
It is. You see it in all those boxes and arrows diagrams in textbooks. It views cognition as information flowing through a system in a series of serial, discrete stages. You detect something, then you recognize it, then you recode it, then you retrieve it, one step at a time.
And people are seen as general purpose symbol manipulators.
Exactly. But this view was really challenged by the second paradigm, which is hugely influential today, the connectionist approach.
Also known as PDP, or neural networks.
Right, and this one ditches the computer metaphor for a brain metaphor. It's a radical shift.
So instead of a central processor and discrete memory boxes,
You have a massive neural network of simple interconnected units, kind of like neurons, and the processing isn't serial. It's largely parallel. Thousands of things are happening at once.
and the connections between the units have different strengths or weights.
Yes, a connection can be excitatory, a positive weight, or inhibitory, a negative weight. And here's the crucial part. Knowledge isn't stored in any one place. Knowledge is the pattern of those connection weights across the entire network. Learning is just the process of adjusting those weights.
So you're explaining things at a subsymbolic level.
You are. And this approach could explain things the old model struggled with, like how our memory can degrade gracefully if there's damage, instead of just shutting down.
Okay, what's paradigm number 3?
The evolutionary approach. This brings us back to the functionalist question. What is cognition for?
It's the idea that our minds evolved under the pressures of natural selection.
Right. So it suggests we have specialized cognitive mechanisms or modules that evolved to solve specific adaptive problems our ancestors faced. A module for acquiring grammar, a module for recognizing edible plants, that sort of thing.
And this leads to some really interesting predictions.
It does. For instance, it predicts we should be really good at reasoning about things that were crucial for survival, like detecting cheating in social exchanges.
And that holds up, right? People are terrible at abstract logic puzzles.
Terrible. But if you frame the exact same logical problem as a social contract, like who is drinking underage at this bar, our performance just skyrockets. Our minds seem to be tuned for that kind of problem.
Fascinating. And the last one.
The ecological approach. And this paradigm argues fiercely that you can't take cognition out of its environment. It says cognition is fundamentally shaped by our culture and our physical context.
This is Jean Lauve's study on grocery shoppers.
The perfect example. She found that when people were calculating the best buy in a grocery store, they didn't use the rigid formulas they learned in school. They used flexible, context-dependent math. They'd estimate, then round.
Because in that context, close enough to the right answer, not a single precise number.
Exactly. The ecological approach says if you only study math skills in a classroom, you're missing the whole picture of how people actually use math in the real world. So it pushes for more naturalistic observation.
Okay. We have the history, the methods, the paradigms. It feels like we have to talk about the physical hardware now.
We have to. The brain. Because no matter how abstract your theory is, it has to be implemented somewhere.
But there was resistance to this for a while, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of early cognitive theorists felt the biological detail was just too messy, too complicated. They wanted to stay at the symbolic software level. Why worry about neurons when you're just drawing boxes and arrows?
But things like connectionism and new imaging technologies just forced the issue.
They did. You can't ignore the hardware anymore. We now assume that different patterns of brain activity reflect different cognitive functions. So let's take a quick tour.
Where do we start?
Let's start at the bottom with the most evolutionarily primitive parts, the hindbrain. This is the stuff right on top of the spinal cord responsible for keeping you alive.
So the medulla oblongata.
Pure life support, it controls your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. Damage here is catastrophic.
To them pons.
The pons is like a big relay station. It helps coordinate information flow, and very cool, it's where the crossover happens. So the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, and vice versa.
And the cerebellum, the little brain at the back.
We used to think this was just for balance and coordinating muscle movements, and it is crucial for that.
But it does more.
A lot more. We now know it's involved in higher-level cognition, especially in shifting attention quickly between, say, what you're hearing and what you're seeing. It's also involved in processing rhythm and time.
Okay, moving up from the hindbrain.
We get to the midbrain. This has more relay centers, but critically, it contains the reticular formation.
Which is like the brain's alarm system.
A great way to put it. It maintains your overall state of alertness and arousal. It's what jolts you awake and gets you ready to respond to something urgent.
And then we get to the main event for cognition, the forebrain.
This is where most of the complex stuff happens. Deep inside, you have the thalamus, which is the grand central station for sensory information. Almost everything you see, hear, and feel gets routed through the thalamus to the right part of the cortex,
Oh, the hypothalamus.
the body's thermostat. It controls all those essential homeostatic behaviors: eating, sleeping, body temperature, sexual behavior, the master regulator.
And tucked into the temporal lobes, you have two structures that are vital for memory.
The hippocampus, which is absolutely indispensable for forming new long-term memories,
And the amygdala.
which is all about emotional memory. It modulates our learning based on emotion, especially fear. It's why traumatic memories could be so powerful and lasting. The amygdala tags them as important.
And all of this is wrapped in the cerebral cortex, the big wrinkly outer layer.
The seat of higher cognition, and it's divided into 4 major lobes,
At the very back, you have the occipital lobe.
almost entirely dedicated to processing visual information.
On the sides, the temporal lobe.
This handles auditory processing, but also complex recognition, like identifying faces. And because it's so close to the hippocampus and amygdala, damage here often causes major memory problems.
At the top, the parietal lobe.
This contains the primary somatosensory cortex, is where you process sensations from your body touch, pain, pressure.
And then the big one at the front, the frontal lobe.
It's massive. It contains the motor cortex for controlling fine movements, but most importantly for us, it contains the prefrontal cortex, or PFC.
The PFC, this is the CEO of the brain.
It absolutely is. It's the home of our executive functions, all the highest level stuff. Long-term planning, making complex decisions, inhibiting impulses, using your working memory to juggle goals.
And what's really striking about the PFC is how long it takes to develop.
It's the last part of the brain to fully mature. It might not be finished until you're in your mid-20s, which explains a lot about teenage behavior, right? The hardware for impulse control and long-term planning is literally still under construction.
Okay, so this tour naturally leads to the idea of localization of function, mapping functions to specific brain areas.
Right, and we have to immediately separate this from the old, discredited idea of phrenology.
Which was the idea you could read personality traits from bumps on someone's skull.
A crude faculty psychology. Modern localization is based on hard empirical evidence from brain injuries and imaging.
And it was really pioneered by people like Paul Broca in the 1860s.
Exactly. Broca found that damage to one specific spot in the left frontal lobe consistently led to a specific type of language problem.
And that's Broca's area, which is associated with Broca's aphasia.
Or non-fluent aphasia. The patients know what they want to say, but they struggle terribly to produce the words. It's a production problem.
And then, a decade later, Carl Wernicke found a different language center.
In the left temporal lobe. And damage to Wernicke's area causes Wernicke's aphasia, or fluent aphasia.
So they can speak easily.
Fluently, but it's often meaningless. A word salad. And their comprehension is severely impaired. So these two discoveries established a powerful map for language in the brain.
And we see this kind of specific mapping in the sensory and motor cortices, too.
We do. They're topographically organized.
Yeah.
Each part of your body maps to a specific strip of the cortex.
Which leads to that famous distorted image of the homunculus, the little man.
Yes. And it's a powerful way to understand a key principle. The amount of brain area devoted to a body part isn't about its physical size. It's about its sensitivity or motor control.
Which is why the lips and hands are huge on the homunculus and the back is tiny.
Precisely.
But there's a big limitation here. Most of our really high-level cognitive processes.
Thinking, problem solving, retrieving a memory from years ago. They're just too complex to be pinned down to one tiny spot. As Lashley showed, they seem to be widely distributed across the brain.
And that's supported by the brain's plasticity.
Its incredible ability to reorganize. If one area is damaged, especially when you're young, other areas can often take over some of its functions. So localization isn't absolute.
Let's also talk about lateralization, the idea that the two hemispheres have different jobs.
For most people, the left hemisphere is the analytical one. It's dominant for language, and it seems to specialize in serial processing, handling things one step at a time.
While the right hemisphere is more synthetic.
It's better at spatial tasks, like solving puzzles or navigating. It's good at integrating parts into a whole.
But it's so important to remember we're not left-brained or right-brained people.
Not at all. The two hemispheres are in constant communication through that massive cable of nerve fibers, the corpus callosum. Every normal cognitive task involves both sides working in concert.
So to see all this in action, we need brain imaging techniques.
We do. And the technique you choose depends entirely on what you want to see: structure, blood flow, or electrical activity.
Let's start with structure, the neuroanatomical techniques.
First, you have the CT scan. This is basically a series of sophisticated X-rays. It's great for seeing differences in tissue density, so you can spot a tumor or bleeding in the brain.
But the image quality is much better with an MRI.
Much better, and with no radiation. MRIs use a powerful magnetic field to get a really detailed picture. The only catch is, because of the magnet, you can't use it if someone has a pacemaker or any metal inside them.
Okay, that's structure. What about function? How do you see the brain working?
For that, you look at blood flow or metabolism because active brain areas need more resources. The older method is the PT scan.
This is the one that involves injecting a radioactive tracer.
It is. Active areas of the brain will suck up more of the tracer and light up. But the big trade-off is time. Its temporal resolution is very slow. It averages activity over minutes, so it can't catch fast mental processes.
Which is why the fMRI is so dominant now.
It is functional MRI.
Yeah.
It's non-invasive, and it works by detecting the change in the ratio of oxygenated to deoxygenated blood.
The bull D signal.
That's the one. Active areas call for more oxygenated blood. fMRI has amazing spatial resolution. It can pinpoint activity to within a few millimeters, and its temporal resolution is much better than PKT. It's the workhorse of cognitive neuroscience.
But if you need to know exactly when something happens, down to the millisecond, you need to look at electrical activity.
For that, you need electrical recording. The EEG uses electrodes on the scalp to measure the summed electrical activity of millions of neurons. It gives you a continuous real-time look at general brain states, like sleep or alertness.
But to see the brain's response to one specific thing,
You need an ERP, an event-related potential. You average the EEG signal right after a specific stimulus is presented, over and over again. This lets you isolate the brain's tiny electrical response to that one event.
and the shape of that ERP waveform is incredibly sensitive.
To things like attention, surprise, recognition. It can track mental processes that happen in just fractions of a second. It has the best temporal resolution of any technique.
So it's this whole array of tools, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, that lets us finally start to connect our abstract theories to the physical reality of the brain.
That is the bridge. That's how we're finally getting inside the black box.
Wow. Okay, that was a truly comprehensive deep dive. We've really laid the entire foundation of cognition.
We really covered the ground.
We defined the field with those everyday scenarios. We tracked its entire history from philosophy through the failures of early schools to the great rejection of behaviorism.
And we saw how that cognitive revolution was fueled by really practical needs in engineering, plus the intellectual breakthroughs in linguistics and computer science.
We detailed that constant balancing act between control and validity in research methods, from just watching people in the wild to the rigor of a true experiment.
And we laid out those 4 modern frameworks: the serial symbolic information processing approach,
The parallel subsymbolic connectionist view.
the survival-focused evolutionary paradigm, and the context is everything ecological approach.
And then we dove into the hardware itself. The brain's architecture, from the basic life support systems up to the highly specialized lobes of the cortex, and the ongoing questions about localization and lateralization.
I think the key synthesis, the thing that ties it all together, is that modern cognitive psychology is just relentlessly trying to connect those levels. How do these different biological activities we can now measure, how do they reflect the distinct cognitive functions we theorize about?
And paradigms like connectionism, with tools like fMRI, they're really blurring the lines.
They are. They're forcing us to think about the biological implementation of our psychological theories.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to take away. As our tools get better and better, as we can see with higher resolution, that neural dance of activation and inhibition in the brain, when does understanding the symbolic structure of thought require us to dive into that messy, subsymbolic biological level?
And on the flip side, when is that level of detail just too much noise? When does it get in the way of a useful, elegant theory of how we think and make decisions?
Keep questioning the utility of your explanatory levels.
For the deep dive, we offer a warm thank you from the Last Minute Lecture team.